Okay, my YouTube people. Next thing on this Evo motor, I'm going to install the push rods. And that includes all the push rod covers. Now what I like to do with these is I like to group everything together so it's real easy to see. And make sure that I have everything that's supposed to be here. I have 3 different O-rings and there's 4 of each one. The 4 big metal washers. The 4 smaller metal washers. 4 springs. The 4 cups. And then 4 of the upper tubes and 4 of the lower tubes. And then 4 of the keepers. The other thing I have 4 of is the push rods. Now you could see I have them even down the bottom, and there are 4 different length push rods here. And you have to be careful and make sure that they go into the right spot, and I'll show you how that's done. Now I pulled this all out to do it, and I realized that everything here wasn't cleaned. So I have to clean all this first, so next shot you see this will be all cleaned. And you have to assemble the full push rod tubes, put them in place, and then drop the push rods down through the heads and through the tubes. So everything needs to be on the tubes, all the O-rings, all the springs, everything. So this is how that goes. I always like to keep old gaskets and old O-rings to make sure that the new stuff I get is the right size. I can't stress enough how important it is to get everything super clean. I put everything you see here in the solvent tank. It did not clean the inside of these tubes or these tubes here. I wound up having to get a rag with solvent and go through those to get all the dirt out of them. So from shortest to longest, these are blue, yellow, purple, green, and I'll show you where it is they go. Shortest one goes on the rear intake. That's this one here. I have it labeled blue, number 1, and it just comes down through here like this. But you have to put the cover on first. The other thing is this engine's going to be sitting for quite some time. I'm going to make sure to put some assembly paste on each end of the push rod. Plus I'm going to oil the push rod so it doesn't rust. Now it's nice and oiled up. You saw my other video, you already saw that I did put assembly lube on each one of the tappets. But like I said, I'm going to hit it with some paste also. I would call this a washer, but in the manual they call it a spacer. Okay, to put this together, I get the upper tube. I have the spring cover on. The spring. They call this a spacer in the manual. You have to put that on. Then the O-ring. The lower tube. The O-ring for the lower tube. And then the manual also calls this a spacer that goes down in the tappet block. Now you line this up here and push it down on into the O-ring. I'm just going to keep the upper O-ring on the upper tube like that. Now I'm going to feed the shortest push rod in. That's blue. I have it oiled because this motor is going to be setting, along with the assembly lube on each end, and just give it a push down in. Everything will stay. Now I'll just put all the O-rings in. Now the yellow goes into the front intake. I have plenty of assembly lube on it. Now the purple goes on the rear cylinder exhaust. Now the green goes on the front cylinder exhaust. And that's the longest one. This is it from the front. Again, I want to go over this so there's no confusion because this can be confusing. The blue is the shortest in the rear intake. That's the shortest. The yellow is here, that's short. So it goes shortest, short. The rear exhaust is the purple, that's long. The front exhaust is green, and that's the longest. So it goes shortest, short, long, longest. Or it goes blue, yellow, purple, green. You see they all have the assembly lube, everybody's got their O-rings in. At this point I'm going to leave the covers off, because as I put the heads on, I want to make sure I'm on the base circle of the cam. And I can't stress this enough. If you're doing this, whether you have oil or not in the lifters, when you put the head on, after you put the heads on, you have to make sure the lifters collapse enough that you can spin the push rods by hand. If you can't, when you spin the motor over, you'll hold the valve open and hit the piston. Trust me, I've done it. When I did it, it broke the valve guide. I had to pull the heads off and have the valve guide fixed before I could go back together. Sometimes it can take up to 30 minutes for these to bleed down. It doesn't matter the time it takes. You have to be able to spin them by hand. I'll show you this, but you cannot move on until that's done Then once they spin by hand, then you can move on to the opposite cylinder.